All right, so I put together a little slideshow that I'm just going to go through. The piece of paper, though, that you guys have, that has the detailed instructions on it. The slideshow is just kind of highlights. I will be going through the process. I won't really actually be brewing it because I assume everyone here knows how to brew tea. So if you can brew tea, you can make kombucha, basically. And it'll take too long for the water to boil and then cool and all that stuff. But I will go through it step by step for how to do it. Okay, and about 7 o'clock.
Would you say that again, because we always
Yeah.
enter it up, we try to word itself.
Oh, kombucha.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I just want to, we are being filmed for the public access channel, just so you guys know. And please make sure to silence or turn off all electronic devices during the presentation. If you guys need bathrooms or anything, you can go out these doors, and there's some right behind the room. And there's a water fountain out there as well. And afterwards, you can go up and look at the creepiness that is a SCOBY that are in those 2 jars up there. There's several in those jars, actually. And I will actually pull them out so you can feel them if you want. And they do feel kind of like disgusting, slimy pancakes. They're pretty cool. Plus, I also have some kombucha over here that we can taste test, mix with juices and taste test. I didn't do any flavorings with secondary fermentation, which I'll go over in here. We can just mix it right now. And in the little checkered bowl, those are actually SCOBYs that you guys can take home with you. And you can also take home one of the little jars as well that has some kombucha in it, and some of those do have SCOBYs in them already, so that's fun. Because if you leave them too long in the fridge, they'll form their own SCOBYs. So, fun fact. Okay, so Kombucha 101. Has anybody here made kombucha before? No? Okay, so let's go over some terminology first. First of all, what is kombucha? It is a fermented, lightly effervescent probiotic drink made from sweetened green, white, or black tea and a SCOBY. What is a SCOBY? That's a big question. Symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. It is also referred to as a mother or a mushroom, but it's not actually a fungus. It is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. It's really the best way to describe it. It's called a mother because when you brew kombucha, it produces another SCOBY. Each batch, it produces a daughter. What is a probiotic? They're microorganisms, live bacteria, and yeast that are beneficial to health, particularly digestive health. They're called good or beneficial bacteria, and they're found in certain foods like yogurt, kefir, kimchi, cottage cheese, and kombucha. Fermentation. Fermentation is a metabolic process that consumes sugar in the absence of oxygen. The products are organic acids, gases, and alcohol. So kombucha, homemade kombucha, does have a small amount of alcohol in it, about the same as an overripe banana. So for you to really feel anything from it, you're going to have to drink so much that you won't be able to move, just from being so full. Secondary fermentation is a process of transferring a liquid into a different container that it was brewed in to allow for carbonation or aging to take place. Generally, all carbonation and flavoring of kombucha takes place in secondary fermentation. And this is also a process that is used for wine and beer and cider making to flavor or age a product. Proposed benefits of drinking kombucha. It has health benefits that are similar to those of green tea. So it's a rich sort of probiotics that can help improve gut health, digestion, inflammation, and increase energy. Contains antioxidants, which are beneficial for helping reduce toxins in the body. And it has antibacterial properties that can help kill infection-causing bacteria and yeast that can cause an infection as well. Okay, so your first steps for brewing kombucha at home. 1, you need a SCOBY. You can get them online from a health food store. I would make sure to call ahead to make sure they do have them, or from a friend that brews kombucha. There is a brewery, Unity Vibration Brewing in Ipsy. They make beer and kombucha, and you can try to call them to see if they sell them. They make large batches and they sell it commercially. Each SCOBY mother produces another SCOBY, which each batch of kombucha that is brewed. The offspring SCOBY is called a daughter. After brewing one batch of kombucha, there will be two, the original mother and daughter. Sometimes the mother will produce two daughters. One of my first SCOBYs I got for this class actually produced two. So I was like, oh, she had twins. It was pretty cute. You can use a SCOBY several times to brew kombucha, generally up to 10 times each SCOBY before it really stops producing. You will also need tea and sugar. Kombucha is made from adding a SCOBY and starter, which is just kombucha or apple cider vinegar. And if you buy a kombucha, it'll come in like a pouch with starter already in there. And you add that to sweeten brewed tea. Kombucha works best with black tea, but you can use a mix of black, green, and or white. If you're mixing teas, make sure that 50% is black because the caffeine helps the process along. You can also use flavored teas, and that'll just give you a different flavor kombucha. A couple years ago, I made a kombucha out of a Russian tea that had strawberries and blackberries in it, and it was really good. It had like a really nice sweetness, and you got a lot of the fruit flavors in there. You also need white granulated sugar. Honey is not recommended because of the natural bacteria in honey. It could kill or harm your SCOBY. Do not use sugar substitutes. Sugar is very important. The fermentation process can't happen without sugar. The yeast in the SCOBY needs to eat the sugar to ferment. The amount of sugar depends on how much kombucha you are brewing. You want to use a cup of sugar per gallon of tea/kombucha. So if you're making 3/4 of a gallon, do 3/4 of a cup at least. You can add more, just don't cut it down. You can adjust it as necessary. If you add more sugar, it may have a higher alcohol content. So just keep that in mind.
Is that information all in here?
Yes, yes. Everything that I'm saying is right in the sheet that you guys are holding. You'll need a container. Use a 1 gallon or larger glass jar. That is what I find to be the most useful. If you look at the front, you can see those are 1 gallon jars, and they're squat and they have a wide mouth. And the wide mouth ones are easier to use, so you can actually reach in and grab your SCOBY after it's done fermenting. I got those at Walmart. They were like $7 or $9 a piece, really cheap. Do not use plastic. Kombucha is acidic, and it can cause chemicals from the plastic to leach into your drink. Do not use plastic. You can use ceramic as long as it's food safe. You just want to be able to cover the top of it. That's very important. Make sure that all your container and all your tools are very clean so you're not introducing bad bacteria into your kombucha. That's very important. Wash everything with very hot water. Dry it out, make sure it is very clean. The size of jar does matter. You want a container with a wide mouth, as I said, so you can easily reach in and pull the SCOBY out. You don't have to, but it's a lot easier to get out of that jar instead of one with a tiny opening. Your SCOBY, what's gonna happen is your SCOBY, they start out usually pretty small, and they grow to fit over the top of your container. They'll usually float on the top of your liquid, and they'll just it looks really weird, but they grow and just fit the container. They may also sink to the bottom. It doesn't really matter. They're gonna do what they wanna do. The size of your batch will depend on the size of your jar. If you have a 1 gallon jar, you will brew about 3/4 gallons of kombucha, which is what is up there. That's a 1 gallon jar, so I got 3/4 of a gallon. You do want to leave some headspace at the top. If you have, I'm good. If you have a 1.5 gallon jar, you can brew about 1 gallon and so forth. You also need a breathable cover for your jar. I highly recommend coffee filters. You can use cheesecloth and a rubber band, but insects can get through cheesecloth pretty easily. And apple cider, this is basically the same as vinegar, and insects will love it. They will flock to it. So just keep that in mind. You do want to keep it covered, but you want it to be able to breathe because the fermentation process does let off gas. You need a cool, dry, dark space for storage, usually inside of a cabinet, as long as it's not like right next to or on top of your refrigerator, because that can get pretty warm. Store it in a cool, dry cabinet. The fermentation process, you can ferment anywhere from a week to 30 days. The longer you ferment, the stronger it's going to be, the more acidic it'll be. If you just want like a lighter, sweeter kombucha, do like 1 to 2 weeks. You just have to keep it undisturbed in a cool, dry, dark space, and no direct sunlight, no high heat or cold temperatures, because it could kill your SCOBY. And it could also cause other bacteria to grow in there. Okay, so the brewing process. Step 1, gather all supplies and make sure all of your containers and tools are clean. I do not recommend using metal utensils. Use plastic or even wooden, just because it is an acid and it could eat away at the metals. Brew a strong tea using black, green, or white tea. Remember, 50% black tea and a mix of others is fine. Try flavored tea for a unique flavor of kombucha. You can use loose leaf or tea bags, it doesn't matter. Just do a really strong tea. Let the tea cool completely. You do not want to put a SCOBY into boiling hot liquid because it will kill it. What I usually do is I just I boil a small amount of water, make a very strong tea, pour it into my container, fill it to where I want it with cool water to cool it down fast, and then add my SCOBY into it. Just saves a lot of time besides boiling that much water. Add 1 cup of sugar per gallon of tea. You can add more if you like, just do not add less. Remember, sugar is a crucial part of the fermentation process. Do not substitute honey or sugar-free substitute. Stir to dissolve using a plastic spoon or a wooden spoon. Pour your sweetened tea into your clean container. Add your SCOBY and your starter. Your SCOBY should come with starter. If not, you can add some apple cider vinegar to help get the process going. Or you can also go out and buy store-bought kombucha and add that to it too. If, like the SCOBYs that you're going to get, they come with a 1/2 cup of starter, which is good for a 1/2 gallon. You can make larger amounts of that. It just may take longer for it to ferment. Or you can just add a little bit of apple cider vinegar and it'll help speed it along. I also do have the jars of the kombucha over there, which you can take and use that as starter if you want as well. You should have 1 cup of starter per gallon of kombucha. Again, if you don't have enough, add apple cider vinegar. Generally, your SCOBY will float at the top of your container. It'll usually sit on top of your liquid. It may not at first. It may sink to the bottom and just kind of sit there for a few days, but it should rise to the top, and then it'll start growing and cover the entire top of the liquid. If it does not, it's fine. One of mine just sat on the bottom the entire time, and it turned out just fine. It just depends. Like I said, the SCOBY's going to do what it wants to do. You will start to see another SCOBY forming, and you may not be able to see it from outside the jar, but when you actually pull the SCOBY out, you'll be able to see. Usually it'll be really small, like on the bottom of the big SCOBY, or sometimes it'll be the same size if you let it ferment for a really long time, and you can just see it just looks like a stack of pancakes in there, and you can just gently pull them apart to use it again. So after you've poured your tea and your SCOBY in there, you cover your container with a breathable cover and secure it. Make sure that it's very secure. I was fermenting this under my desk. So my desk has smelled like vinegar for like a month now, but that's okay. So I had to use, the first batch I used cheesecloth and ants got into it. So I had to throw all that away. And the second batch I started using the coffee covers, and I used painter's tape to just tape around the edge, and it was fine. No ants got into it that time. So just make sure it's secure so nothing can get into it. So place your jar in a cool, dark, dry place where it will not be disturbed. You don't want to pick it up and shake it every day. Just leave it alone. Let it sit for a couple weeks, and then after a couple weeks, you can start tasting it. So let sit for a week to a month. And when it's done, you're ready to bottle and put into secondary fermentation, or you can just drink it right then. It's up to you. Secondary fermentation is when it'll start getting fizzy. If you just want it, you don't really want it very fizzy, you can just drink it straight when it's done. Okay. The longer it sits, the stronger the flavor it will have. You can open your container and taste your kombucha after a week. That's a good way. Just get out a little plastic spoon, taste it, see if you want to let it sit longer, if it's done, and then you can start bottling. It's really all just a matter of taste. Like I said, the longer you let it sit, the stronger it'll be. It'll be more like a vinegar than sweet. When your kombucha is done, you're ready to bottle. So remove the jar cover and carefully remove the SCOBY from the jar with your hands. I just put mine on a plate, and there's a little bit of liquid that just kind of, I mean, they've been sitting in liquid, so it's going to be wet. You can pour a little bit of liquid on there just to keep them moist. You don't really have to, if you're going to be have it sit out for a while, then I would cover it, but you can put it in a bowl or a plate or whatever, just leave it on your counter while you're brewing your tea and you're bottling. It'll be okay. Just make sure if there are fruit flies around, cover it, because fruit flies and ants love SCOBYs. If you're going to brew another batch, save at least 1 cup of your kombucha per batch, per gallon, before you go to bottle it. Just reserve a cup, or even more. You can do more if you want than a cup. It'll just help the process go faster. Use cheesecloth and filter your kombucha into a pitcher or into your containers and bottles. You do want to put them in airtight bottles. Mason jars are not airtight unless you seal them with a hot water bath, which you do not want to do with kombucha. So I recommend, if you look over at the table, there are flip top lids. Those are airtight. Those you can get on Amazon. They were like $15 for 6 of them. You can also find jars like that at a homebrew store, because they're great for bottling beer and cider as well. And you could look at Walmart, a homebrew store. You can also check at Walmart, because a lot of times they'll have flip top bottles as well. So those are airtight. The more airtight it is, basically the fizzier it'll be in secondary fermentation. If you put them in jars that are not airtight, so little mason jars, you may notice that another SCOBY will form, and it won't hurt you. You can just filter it out before you drink it. Or you could also just use that as a starter to make more kombucha. You can add more than 1 SCOBY to a jar. If you look up there, one of mine I think has 3 of them in there. It just speeds up the process, basically. Okay, so when you bottle it, if you want it to be fizzy, you can put it in airtight bottles and place in a cool, dark place, or place it in a cool, dark like cabinet. Just keep it. Don't put it in something hot. Or you can also put it in the fridge. If you put your bottles in the fridge for secondary fermentation, it's not going to be as strong of a carbonation. It'll be a more subtle kind of fermented drink. These were in the fridge, so it's not going to be like a sparkling water kind of fermentation. It's going to be smaller bubbles. It's going to be a lighter carbonation. Make sure that the kombucha is not in heat or direct sunlight. If it gets hot, it can explode because it is carbonated. When in secondary, it is in the process of carbonating, so it does have gas in there. That's what makes the carbonation. So do not put it in direct heat. Do not let it get hot. It can explode. To keep it from exploding, especially if you put it on your counter or put it in a cabinet to ferment in secondary, just burp it every couple days. Just pop the top of it, let some of the gases out, seal it back up, and let it go. And you can ferment anywhere from 3 days, 7 days, however long you want it. The longer it ferments, the fizzier it'll be. If you want to flavor your kombucha, you can add your flavorings before secondary fermentation, or you can wait till right before drinking. It just depends. So if you're like, I don't know what flavors I really want, you can wait until it's done with secondary fermentation, and then you can mix it with juice right before drinking. Juice, tea, lemonade, you can mix it with carbonated water, basically anything. If it's a much stronger kombucha, of course, it's going to taste a little bit different than mine. Mine's a little bit sweeter, I think. So it's a little bit easier to mix with things. So when you go to brew another batch, you want to separate your mother and daughter, and you can just use the daughter, you can use the mother, you can put them both back in a new one, or you can start new batches, 2 batches right then as well. It's up to you. Like I said, a SCOBY will produce a baby every batch. You can give it away to friends. You can also put it in a compost pile. It's got a lot of nutrients in it. If you start out with 1 SCOBY and you do want to make 2 batches from the get-go, you could also cut a SCOBY in half and use it, and it'll grow and form to the size of your jar. They're kind of little creepy creatures, so. Okay, so flavoring kombucha. These are just some tips when it comes to flavoring. The basic rule is you can really flavor it with anything. You can use fresh fruit, frozen, dried fruit, juice, extract, syrup, really basically anything, or you could just mix it with existing drinks. You can put it in a cocktail if you want. If you're using fresh, frozen, or dried fruit, start with 10 to 30% fruit and 70 to 90% kombucha. That's just like a good rule of thumb, so you'll still get both flavors in there. If using juice, start with 10 to 20% juice and 80 to 90% kombucha. You can flavor it with herbs as well. Just experiment, because the strength of herbs, they vary. Herbs and spices, just mix a little bit in there and see what you like, basically. If you're using extracts like almond, vanilla, etc., start with a 1/4 teaspoon of extract per cup of kombucha. And obviously these are all to taste, so if you want to add more or less fruit, go for it. At the secondary fermentation part, it's not going to hurt the kombucha to add more juice to it or not. By that part, it's pretty much done. I also have some resources on here that will tell you where I got my SCOBY. I got all my SCOBYs from Posy Mom. I got them through Amazon. Like I said, you can check with local health food stores for SCOBYs or call Unity Vibration Brewing in Ypsi. See if they have SCOBYs either to give away or sell. Bottles were purchased from Amazon. Search flip top bottles or kombucha bottles flip top. You can go to brewing stores. You can also check out Walmart. A lot of times Walmart has a great selection of bottles. Look in with the canning jars. They'll have them over there. Jars, you can get mason jars basically anywhere. Walmart. Tractor Supply Company actually usually has pretty good sales on jars. I think that's where I got these. And my fermentation jars, I bought those at Walmart. You can really use anything. Just make sure it's glass and it's easy for you to pick up. That's another thing. Make sure that you can lift these things too, and that you can easily reach in and grab the SCOBY out. Okay? Any questions? Yes.
You've done the second bottle,
Mm-hmm.
and you're talking about letting it ferment 3 to 7 days.
Yeah.
How do you stop the fermentation process?
You can take it out of the fridge, just burp it. It's not going to overly carbonate. It'll like ferment to a certain, basically it'll ferment only so much. Same, I also brew beer and it's the same with that. It'll ferment to where it gets fizzy, but it's not going to ferment so much that it's, overly crazy carbonated. It'll just kind of do its thing and then it'll stop when it's ready. Yeah, it eats the sugar. Once the sugar is gone, it stops. Yeah. Same thing with, when you are initially fermenting with the first fermentation, it's kind of the same thing. You do want to kind of pull it out of that because it'll just turn into vinegar if you just leave it too long. But with secondary, once the sugars are used up, it'll stop carbonating.
When would you put ginger in? I really like ginger.
You could do ginger right before secondary fermentation. You don't want to add flavorings for the primary fermentation. Yeah, yeah. So I actually got ginger syrup over there too, which we could try ginger syrup in there. We're gonna do a taste test. I got some juices and ginger syrup. I got pineapple juice, tart cherry, I think guava, a couple other ones, and ginger syrup, and we can taste it. But you can just slice up ginger and put it right into the bottles for secondary fermentation. Yeah, or even use minced ginger. You could use ground, it's just you're gonna get a sediment if you use like a ground spice. I've also tried this with pumpkin pie spice, and that was actually pretty good for fall. So you just kind of mix it in there. You may have to just filter it again after your secondary fermentation. If a SCOBY forms during your secondary fermentation, just filter it, put a little piece of cheesecloth over it, pour it into another glass. The cheesecloth will catch the new baby SCOBY, and they're just like this little blob of, it's kind of gross looking. It's like this clear gelatinous blob. It'll catch it, and then you can just drink whatever's left. Yes?
Couple things, there's no problem drinking a SCOBY, right?
It's not going to hurt you. It's just, it's like a gooey, because I was drinking one of them. I'm like, oh, there's a SCOBY. So it's just really kind of slimy and doesn't, it's just not like a pleasant feel in your mouth. So,
But it could be very helpful.
yeah, it could be.
Then you said you could use a SCOBY up to 10 times.
Yeah.
Like, I'm wondering about these here because they look like they must have been here for quite a few because they look big and.
One of them, well, it's funny because the really thick one on the left, that one was just from one batch. So this is, I just rebrewed that on Thursday, and that one was the one that formed from the previous batch, and I only left that in about 2 weeks. So that one actually is not very old. Wow. Yeah, for some reason that one came out really thick. So I don't know.
After 10 times, does it lose its bacteria?
It'll stop producing, it'll stop, yeah, it'll stop producing. It could also take a really long time for it to ferment. So, and you also want to minimize, especially if you're handling it, you don't want to use it more than, I mean, I usually only use mine about 3 or 4 times, and then I get rid of them. You can use it up to 10 times, but basically if you pull it out, yeah, you just start with the babies. If you pull it out, you keep pulling it out of the jar, there's more and more chance it's being subjected to other bacteria as well.
How you get it out of the jar?
Oh, I'll show you. I'll pull one out and show you guys. Yeah, and you guys can touch it. And I was grossing out all my coworkers for about a month and a half with my kombucha. So, yeah, yes.
So I had a question too.
Mm-hmm.
On the SCOBY, if we don't use it right away to start another brew, can you refrigerate it for a while? Or is there a shelf life?
You can refrigerate it. If possible, try to vacuum. If you vacuum seal it, it lasts longer. So the ones that I got for you guys to take home, like they have an expiration date of the end of November because they've been vacuum sealed. So if you vacuum seal them, they're gonna last a lot longer. They can last, like you can keep them in a jar of kombucha and put it in your fridge for a couple weeks. I would recommend trying to use it as fast as possible though. Just to make sure no other outside bacteria has gotten in there. You just wanna try to keep everything as clean as possible. Because there is a risk where you're fermenting anything at home that if something is not clean, you could introduce bacteria in there that could be harmful. This is a pretty safe thing to make at home. Just wash the dishes, wash your hands really well, and make sure that you are using, clean containers and utensils.
Now, how do you know it's ready? Is there a certain age that you?
It's just all by taste. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because everybody's gonna like a different kind of kombucha. Some people really like it. Like, I'm a big fan of shrubs. Has anybody tried any shrubs? They're drinking vinegars. And you can make cocktails out of them, or you can just mix them. They're non-alcoholic drinking vinegars. You can mix them with club soda, and it's vinegar. It is very much like drinking apple cider vinegar. A lot of them are flavored. There's a company in Detroit, McCleary Brothers, that makes them for sale, and you can find them at they're kind of like fancier cocktail bars will have them. a lot of times, and they're not as popular now as they were like in the 30s and 40s. But I like usually a more vinegary kombucha. This one is a little bit more sweet just because I didn't leave it in that long. So it really is just for taste. Any other questions?
The insects you mentioned, is that, am I going to have that even well covered? Is that something?
No, I mean, I didn't have fruit flies flying around my desk or anything. My desk is on the other side of the kitchen. So that's why I got ants in my first. But once I covered it with the coffee filters, it was fine. Yeah, I didn't see any crawling around or anything. I just saw like one like floating in there in each, and I'm like, seriously? So I had to throw it all out. Yes.
I did have failure.
Mm-hmm.
It started growing something on the top that wasn't the SCOBY, and I was advised to just throw it away.
Yeah, there may be, like some of the SCOBYs that I got, I am throwing them away because something else got in there.
Mm-hmm.
It is a natural bacteria or a different kind of yeast got in there, and it could cause an infection in your SCOBY. So if you see something, or if it smells really, really strong and not, like you can smell these, and the ones that I opened earlier that I'm like, oh, these came open a little bit, then you can tell it just does not smell right at all. If it doesn't look right to you, or it has a really strong odor, just pitch it and start over. Because you don't want to make something that is going to hurt you if you drink it. Yeah. Yes.
Vinegar,
Uh-huh.
apple cider vinegar.
Yep.
The regular Heinz pasteurized.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, what about the gray that's got the mother in it?
You could do that too. Yeah.
Either one will work?
Yep.
Okay.
Or like I said, you could just go to Bush's or the gas station and buy a bottle of kombucha and dump it in there if you don't have enough starter. I brewed 3/4 of a gallon with the SCOBYs that you guys are getting that had a half cup, so that should brew about a half gallon. And it did work. I just left it in the primary fermentation a little bit longer, and it was fine. Any other questions? All right, you guys want to go look at a SCOBY up close?